The idea that you invent other people probably sounds completely absurd. After all, they are standing right in front of you. You hear what they say, see what they do, and even spend years with them. How could you invent someone who actually exists? And yet you've probably experienced a moment when someone suddenly seemed like a completely different person. Maybe a close friend disappointed you, even though you were certain you knew them inside and out. Or a new coworker seemed arrogant at first, until months later you realized they had simply been shy. In moments like these, we almost automatically assume that the other person has changed. But what if what you're actually noticing is that the person you thought you had known all this time never really existed? Because we never encounter other people with just our eyes. Our brain fills in expectations, hopes, and entire stories without us even noticing. And that leads to a question that sounds completely crazy at first. How many people do you truly know? And how many of them were created by your own brain? The strange thing is that this process doesn't begin after months or years. Most of the time, it starts within the very first seconds. Before we truly get to know someone, we begin to categorize them. Whether we want to or not, our brain immediately gets to work. It watches a few gestures, hears a few sentences, and instantly tries to build a complete picture from those few pieces of information. What's remarkable is that we don't even notice this moment. No one consciously thinks, "I'll just make up the rest." And yet, that's exactly what happens. Imagine getting into an elevator with a new neighbor for the very first time. They give you a quick nod, look at their phone, and don't say a single word. After 10 seconds, you already believe you know what kind of person they are. Maybe unfriendly or distant, or simply not very likable. A few days later, you run into them again. This time they smile, apologize, and tell you that they had just found out that their father wasn't doing well that day. Suddenly, the exact same scene takes on a completely different meaning. But the truly remarkable part is something else. We often believe we're judging people objectively. In reality, we're only seeing a tiny fragment of their lives. Our mind fills in the rest as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Not because it's trying to deceive us, but because it doesn't particularly like unanswered questions. An incomplete picture simply doesn't feel right. So our brain does what it constantly does. It fills in the gaps. And we don't even notice it's happening. What our brain places into those gaps is anything but random. It draws on what already exists within us. Our experiences, hopes, fears, and expectations. That's why two people can meet the exact same person and still come away with completely different impressions. Imagine you've been texting someone for a few weeks. The conversations are going well, you share the same sense of humor, and before long, a picture naturally begins to form in your mind. You imagine what this person is like in everyday life, how they think and how they react. Eventually, you meet for the first time, and even though you barely know each other, it almost feels as if you're meeting someone who has existed for a long time, but a large part of that person had existed only in your imagination. This probably happens far more often than we realize. Our brain doesn't patiently wait until it has enough information. It starts filling in the missing pieces long before that. In a way, it writes a character before the actual story has even begun. And the crazy part is that we often mistake that invented character for reality. Fascinating, isn't it? That's why we sometimes don't just fall in love with people. We also fall in love with possibilities or expectations, with a version that our own mind has already finished writing. But here's the real heart of the whole story. We invent people exactly the way we need them at that particular moment. When we long for closeness, small gestures quickly feel like special affection. But if we're hurt or distrustful, those very same gestures suddenly seem dishonest or calculated. The person in front of us is exactly the same. The only thing that has changed is the filter through which we see them. That also explains why the same person can seem incredibly likable to one person and almost unbearable to another. Both are convinced they're seeing the truth. And yet they're seeing something completely different. Pretty crazy, isn't it? Our brain is astonishingly creative. If someone doesn't reply to a message until hours later, it immediately writes the perfect script. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they've lost interest. Maybe they're upset. From a single piece of information, 10 different possibilities suddenly emerge, and surprisingly often, we believe the story that best matches our own expectations. That's why we never look only at another person. At the same time, we're looking at our hopes, our fears, and our experiences. And sometimes it's not so easy to tell where the real person ends and our own story begins. But then something happens that almost everyone has experienced at some point. Eventually, someone behaves in a way that no longer fits our story. They say something unexpected, make a decision we never imagined they would make, or suddenly reveal a side of themselves we had never seen before. And in that moment, it often feels as if that person has changed. But that's not necessarily the case. Often, it's not the person that falls apart. It's the image we built of them. And of course, that can be painful, because we don't just lose a person. At the same time, we lose all the expectations, hopes, and explanations we had attached to them. Maybe you've heard this sentence before: "You're not the same person you used to be." Sometimes that's true, because people really do change, but sometimes that sentence means something completely different. You no longer fit the story I've been telling myself about you. At first, that sounds harsh, and yet there's often more truth in it than we'd like to admit. That's why some disappointments feel so deeply personal, not because we've suddenly received new information, but because our brain has to rewrite its own story. And if there's one thing our brain really doesn't like doing, it's admitting that it may have written the main character itself. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. The real question isn't, how can I stop inventing people? We probably can't. Tomorrow, our brain will once again fill in gaps, make assumptions, and build entire stories from just a few observations. That's simply how it works. But now, something surprising begins. The moment we accept that our picture is incomplete, we give other people the chance to genuinely surprise us. And honestly, that makes relationships far more interesting. Imagine having to turn off every movie after the first 5 minutes because you're convinced you already know the rest. That's exactly what we often do with people. We believe we've understood their personality, even though the real chapter may not have even begun yet. That might be the real reason people can still surprise us even after decades. Simply because no person ever completely fits the story our brain has written about them. Every human being is greater than any idea we could ever form of them. Real understanding of people, then, isn't about seeing through others as quickly as possible. It means not rushing to fill every gap and giving someone the freedom to be more than the story our brain wrote about them in the first few minutes. This isn't meant as a criticism, because you're not doing anything wrong. Every person in the world unconsciously and automatically fills in the missing parts of other people's stories. Our brain simply can't do otherwise. It searches for patterns, connections, and quick explanations. That's exactly what helped it make decisions over millions of years. It's only today that this same ability sometimes causes us to see people who don't actually exist in that form. Our brain will probably always invent stories about other people. The only thing that really matters is whether we eventually recognize them as stories. Because in that moment, something interesting happens. Other people no longer have to fit the picture we've created of them. For the first time, they're allowed to be contradictory, to change, or to reveal sides of themselves we never expected, or perhaps, for the very first time, to simply be themselves. Maturity means knowing that the brain automatically creates projections and still never forgetting that every person will always be greater than the story we tell ourselves about them.